Hello and welcome to our podcast at Get Legally Speaking. Our legal conversation today will be on bullying, and this is our special episode for Anti-Bullying Week. I am joined by barrister Emma Waldron from 3 Paper Buildings Chambers in London. Emma specialises in education law and she is regularly instructed to appear in the High Court and upper and first tier tribunals. Emma's expertise includes working on cases with complex issues, and she has a strong knowledge in representing matters involving individuals' special educational needs and those that have an intense sensitive nature. Emma has proven to have a second to none ability of understanding of her clients and this challenging area of law, and she is recognised as a leading individual in her field and is listed in Chambers and Partners and the Legal 500. Hello, Emma. It's lovely to see you again.
Hi, Hattie. Thank you so much for having me back. It's a real privilege, and I'm just delighted to be here with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. And this is a special episode for our Anti-Bullying Week this week, from November the 16th, 2022, November the 20th. And I have to say, having done some research on this area more extensively than what we naturally know as just human beings plodding along in life, I was utterly shocked to read some of the statistics. And one of those is that 62% of children have said that they have been bullied by a classmate, and 37% say they've been bullied by somebody in their school that they don't really know that well, but they are in their school. I mean, that's a big number. That's over half of children, say, look, I've been bullied. And then there's a survey that I looked at by a company called the Aggregate Industries, and it stated some really shocking stuff. I mean, the UK is the 4th worst affected country for bullying out of 34 countries that they surveyed. And I thought,
isn't it?
I mean, we like being at the top, but the 4th for bullying is not a great gig at all.
No, it's really shocking statistics.
It is. And then even more shockingly, you hear they claim that 65% of LGBT young people experience homophobic bullying in school. I mean, that's just so sad, isn't it? It's wrong, it's sad, it's horrid to even read, as a statistic.
Yeah. And I'd like to say that it comes as a surprise, but I'm not sure it does, because even if we cast our minds back, Hattie, to when you and I were in school, we all knew someone. If it wasn't us ourselves being bullied, we all knew somebody that had. And the fact that the situation hasn't really changed is quite depressing. I think the situation has changed, though, in as much as how bullying is taking place, I think is quite different to perhaps what you and I were used to back when we were at school, because it's not just now limited to name calling and teasing and people being beaten up on the playground. There's the whole cyber element to bullying now, which
goodness,
you and I never had.
Goodness. Do you know, I actually don't know how I would have coped, really, as a young child, a 13, a 14, a 15-year-old, even 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds. With my nephew's 10 years old, he's got an iPhone, with access to all of this Snapchat and all the online stuff. I don't know how I would have coped if that was thrown into my mix when I was a child. I mean, I was fortunate I wasn't bullied at school, but I did see bullying take place. I actually, unfortunately, had an altercation with a bully because I was trying to stop them from bullying somebody I knew.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, I don't think there's many school children that we can speak to that would say, I've never seen bullying. I've never seen it. But it comes in different forms, doesn't it? And let's talk about that, Emma. What kind and types of behaviour, apart from your traditional sort of pinning somebody up against the wall and saying, hey, you, whatever the bullies say, what kind of behaviour can be considered bullying in the eyes of the law?
Okay, so I think the starting point here is that there is actually no definition in law of what bullying is. It's usually, though, repeated behaviour or words intended to cause some harm, whether that's physical or emotional, to the person that's receiving it. And as you've highlighted, I think really clearly in your introduction to this podcast, it is often aimed, but not always, at certain groups. So it might be because of somebody's sexuality or sexual orientation. It might be related to their gender. It might be related to a physical or mental disability that they're suffering with. There is no legal definition, but that's broadly what we're talking about when we're talking about bullying. Something repeated, intended to cause physical harm or emotional harm, often aimed at certain individual groups, but not always. It could be physical, it could be teasing, it could be name calling, threats, it could be cyberbullying. It may or may not have a sexual element to it as well. Those are the sorts of things, I think, when we're looking at bullying that we're talking about here.
Yes, no, indeed. And I further read actually in a statistic that the BBC had gathered saying that 59% of children believe that attitudes towards their appearance was the likely cause. So how they looked, you know, it could be the way you dress, the way you carry your hair. I remember actually very early on in my secondary school days, I walked in with this bag and there was this sort of Barbie equivalent called Gem. No one's heard of it, I know. I'm not even going to say, did you ever hear of Gem? It was a Gem bag and I was carrying it around. And now my friends, and I wasn't being bullied about it, but you know, they all had a big laugh about it. It was a big hoo-ha, and that was just the end of it. But I could see how you know, unpleasant behavior can come from just something you're carrying around. It could be, you know, your as simple as your school bag or your trainers. You know, if you're not wearing the latest trainers and you've got something on that is so second grade that someone then starts to pick on you. But I mean, it quickly becomes a big issue. And I think I have certainly seen situations where a child doesn't even realize that the behavior that's going on is actually bullying. I mean, it's enormous. It affects confidence, self-esteem, mental health. It's enormous. So what advice could we give to parents who have children that are being bullied? What can we say about that?
I think first and foremost, just talk to your children about this issue. You don't have to even specify it as being something that you think they are experiencing, but talk about it in general terms. Talk about what it is, talk about what it can look like, talk about how it can make people feel. If you're concerned that your particular child is being the victim of bullying, though, absolutely speak to them about it, but also consider whether or not you need to talk to the school. Do you need to get some involvement here from a tutor or a head teacher? Any member of staff really that you feel that you can confide in, or you feel that your child can confide in, because it's really, really important that people speak up about these issues and they don't just sit on it and let it fester and affect their mental health, because it can do and it will do. Speak to people about it, whoever it is that you feel you can trust and you feel that your child can trust. Also bear in mind that every school should have, and every state school must have, a behaviour policy. And usually those are available on the school's website. If they're not, for whatever reason, available on the school's website, ask for a copy of it, because that should also set out what's expected of pupils in terms of their behaviour, and importantly, what sanctions could be imposed on pupils who don't abide by that behaviour policy. So consider that. There are times, though, when bullying goes above and beyond the name calling that you might see on the playground to something a lot more serious. And if you're entering that field where actually it's straying from being bullying to actually something which could be illegal, you might also want to contemplate calling the police. So that's things like violence or assault, theft, repeated harassment or intimidation. And again, I say that could or could not be of a sexual nature. Repeated threats, abusive phone calls, and hate crimes. If it's straying into that level of severity, then at that point you may need to consider whether or not this is actually something that goes beyond the school's remit and actually into the arena of being something that you need to report to the police.
No, absolutely. I mean, the schools must follow anti-discrimination laws, and I think bullying comes under that umbrella to some degree, doesn't it? But
absolutely.
I think anybody that's experiencing bullying, and it could actually, I have seen an example in the past where a parent didn't want to go to the school and talk about it because they thought it would affect their child in a detrimental way. They thought it would be detrimental to the situation. They thought, no, because then you'd suffer more. The school would look at you and think that you're just making, allegations, and it will cause more trouble. But for God's sake, I think that has to be the right advice. You've got to speak to somebody, particularly the child, be it a parent, a parent of yours. It could be a teacher that doesn't teach you a subject, but you've got a good relationship with, or an adult member of the family that's not a parent, that's a family friend. You've got to speak up. You must not be afraid to ask for help. And it doesn't matter how strong and confident you come across as an individual. You've got to get help, because these things, bullying has to stop. If you get the right help, the school certainly has to take actions to help the child and the parents through this situation. And at the end of this podcast, I will mention a couple of support lines where there's free telephone numbers, free websites for both children and parents. But let's go to the other side here and talk about the child that's doing the bullying. Because that's another big issue in its own, and I don't sit here and say, oh, a bully's a bully, they shouldn't be offered any help. They're the ones creating the problem. What advice can we give a parent that's dealing with their child where their child's the bully?
I'm really glad that you asked this question, Hattie, because I think it's something that so often is ignored. There's so much of a focus, and understandably so, on the victims of bullying, and comparatively little focus on the people who are actually the perpetrators, as it were. I think from my experience, people don't behave in a vacuum. People behave the way that they do, usually for a reason. So I think if you're a parent in that situation where you have a child who's been accused of being the bully, start to ask yourself the question of, well, why may that be? Is it because they have some issues with confidence or low self-esteem? Do they bully others to make themselves feel better about themselves?
You never think that, would you, Emma? You'd never naturally think that a bully actually has issues of confidence and self-esteem. Naturally, I think the natural thought process is, well, a bully's confident and they have all the self-esteem and they're front foot forward, bull in a china shop. But it's not always the case.
No, not always the case. And often it's used, isn't it, as a bravado means of appearing stronger than you actually are. Is there something going on under the surface that's causing them to behave in this way? Do they require some more support in school? And I know, again, it seems an unusual thing to say that, why might they need additional support if this is the way that they're behaving? But all I can say again is that we don't behave in a vacuum. There's a reason why generally people behave in the way that they do. Is there, for example, some sort of undiagnosed special educational need that child may have? Are there things going on in the home that's making that particular aspect of their life stressful or difficult to manage, that's causing them upset and hurt? And bullying is then means of really lashing out against the situation that they're in. It's a complicated picture. It's not necessarily,
isn't it,
just a situation.
No, I have to agree with you. I don't think it's just as simple as saying, do you know what, that person's a bully? And, just disregard what's going on there. And, let's penalise them, let's punish them. And yes, by all means, what has to happen, it has to be stopped. But I think there definitely needs to be a very close look at why the bully is a bully. Why are these actions actually taking place? And, I would hope that schools support both sides of the coin here to be able to resolve it. Does a bully ever stop being a bully? I mean, there are questions that, goodness, that's $1 million question, isn't it, really? But
absolutely.
No, I completely agree. So let's talk about the legal obligations of the school. What legal obligations, and let's talk about the top tier of legal obligations, Emma, because I'm quite aware that when we're talking about the law, we can go out off into the realms of the never ending. What legal obligations are the schools under to protect a child from being bullied?
Okay, so the first issue is something that I've touched on already, but there must be in all state schools a behaviour policy, something which clearly sets out to all students what is expected of them from a behaviour perspective. Independent schools don't have the same sort of obligation on them, but most do have.
And I
Yeah.
thought, really? Why doesn't a private school have a behaviour policy in place? Have to have a behaviour policy in place? I found that quite odd, but yeah.
It is odd. Good independent schools will have them. I think this is the best answer that I can give there. They have to be reviewed regularly, those behaviour policies. A lot of schools, although they're not strictly speaking obliged to do this, will have not only a behaviour policy, but an anti-bullying policy as well. So usually the behaviour policy is the catch-all, but many schools will have anti-bullying policies as well, which should set out the things like who to report incidents to, how you can report incidents, what happens when you do, those sorts of things. In terms of the more general duty on all schools, they have a legal duty to ensure that children are kept reasonably safe from harm. The operative word there being reasonably safe. No school can ever, I think, in my opinion, completely eliminate bullying, however hard they try. And no school can ever protect a child from all harm. That's an impossibility. So what the law expects of a school is to adopt a position where it is taking reasonable steps to keep children safe.
And that's it, isn't it? I mean, you know, they've got to try and prevent discrimination and harassment and victimization. And there's so much going on. But as you say, as we said earlier, cyberbullying, the fact that most children have access to a online gadget, be it their phone, a tablet, the computer, the laptop, or something at home. And I mean, one of the things that I have to say with the school that my children go to, they have had regular talks and events for parents to educate themselves first, to be able to then help their children. But how do you ever eliminate bullying? How do you ever say, right, there is absolutely none of it going on? Because I have witnessed and seen it happening, Emma, on such a subtle level and on such a almost in the background, but it still exists in that child's life. You know, it could be simple things like, you know, they don't talk to, one group doesn't talk to a child. They don't say anything to the child, but they exclude that child on purpose from events, from being with them, from playing, from being part of that group. And that's such a subtle way of actually, you know, that's neglecting, isn't it? And I mean, what can the school do? The school can't go to the group that's excluding a child and say, you have to befriend that child.
Yeah.
You have to hang around with that child, you know, but yet there's harm through those actions coming to that child.
Yeah. And as you quite rightly identified the issue of cyberbullying and of a lot of this of these incidents now taking place on that platform. And you mentioned Snapchat. I mean, Snapchat is terrible in that as soon as the message is received, it can be deleted. That's the whole purpose, I think, of Snapchat, that you're sent an instant message which then effectively deletes itself. So you can see how that can be used as a platform for children to bully other children.
Because they can get access to that child beyond the school time, beyond during the day at school. You know, I'll go back to when I was in school again. When I left school for the day, I left school for the day. There was the house telephone. Now I sound really old, but it really isn't too many decades ago. There was the house telephone, which your friends could call you on, you know, and my parents, I'm sure I heard more than once, get off the phone, you know, come on, that's enough. You've been on the phone for so long. But now a child leaves a school and they can actually, everybody can still be in touch with them. And, you know, if it's negatively, it's ongoing. It's you know, it's a huge thing. I really do. I'm still astounded. And I probably sound archaic for saying this, but I'm still astounded that children are allowed to use these online platforms, these online social media platforms. I just find that astonishing because, as you say, you know, if bullying is going on, they have a means, they have a way to do it, you know,
Absolutely.
online, over the weekend, in the evenings, after school, during school holidays, and all sorts of things. Okay,
and a word of advice.
Yes.
I was just going to say a word of advice to your listeners on that point. I think that if you are aware that your child might be being bullied through those platforms, or if they're telling you that they are, keep a log of it. Keep a record of all of the incidents, and actually not just for cyberbullying, but for any type of bullying, whether it's name calling in the playground, physical. Keep a record of it. Keep a really detailed record of what took place, when, how, who, all of those things, because it's really important if you do want to escalate this further at a later stage, either in the school, or whether it's getting police involvement, or otherwise. It's really important to have that record.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because it's, I mean, it can be quite difficult, I can imagine, for some children to actually explain, how is it happening, what's going on, what did they say? And then it's easy, isn't it, for an adult to say, oh, come on, you know, that was just a bit of testosterone flying around in the school playground, rather than a real bullying event. Or don't hang around with her, you know, if she has got something to say about your hair, you know, with girls bullying each other sometimes, just don't hang on, take no notice. But actually, if that's affecting the child, then that is a problem, isn't it? It's not what we as adults may perceive as, oh, that's bullying or not bullying. It's what is the effect it's having, the actions are having on the child. Emma, let's talk about parents who don't agree with the actions that the schools are taking towards trying to resolve bullying. And I'm sure that, you know, I have to say, you know, in the past, it may not have been about bullying, but it might have been another subject. Would have gone along to my child's school and I've said, look, there's a problem. They've dealt with it. And I thought, well, I'm not that, you know, maybe that's not great, but in this case, if you're not happy with the actions that the school's taking, what can you do as a parent?
So the starting point, I think, is if you can deal with it on an informal basis, that's almost always the best way to be able to resolve these kinds of conflicts that do arise. The school itself will have a complaints policy, and you are entitled to a copy of that complaints policy. And usually the starting point in any complaints policy is to try and resolve it on an informal basis. So that might be having a meeting with the head teacher where you can air some of your concerns, and the head teacher usually then puts in writing a response to that complaint. If not, then, or if that doesn't resolve the issue to your satisfaction, then there's normally at least one or two further stages in the complaints process where you can escalate it to a governing body, or beyond that, if that's what is required, and if you're still not satisfied. As an absolute last resort, and I do say that as a lawyer, it should be an absolute last resort, there might be a means of legal redress. So in particular, it could be a personal injury claim for either the physical or emotional harm that your child has suffered as a result of being bullied. But those claims are really, really complex and difficult to succeed in, and I don't think should immediately be a parent's first thought if they are told by their child that they're being the subject of bullying.
Yes.
Try and resolve it on an informal basis first and foremost.
Yes. So we're saying try to resolve it internally within the school. You know, go to, if you're not happy with the way they've dealt with the incident, then raise that, you know, write a letter, make sure you've got your correspondence in writing, whether it's an email or a letter, and go higher and beyond perhaps the teacher that you're dealing with. It's probably likely that the head teacher would be involved if something has escalated, and try to put your grievances forward and outline them in detail. And I know it's difficult because I can imagine it's easier said than done to say, just try and stay calm and reiterate why you're not happy and what you would see as as a remedy, a suggested remedy, because obviously the school has to try and take an overall view of how they deal with things. And I think sometimes as parents, and I only say this as being a parent myself, you know, you rush to kind of say, but you should be doing this and you should expel that child, or you should be doing that. But you've got to think, well, hold on a moment, because the school's got to try and help the person being bullied, absolutely, and to stop the bullying, but also to help the bully as well, and their parents, if their parents, you know, hopefully are taking an active interest into, why is our child bullying? This is incorrect. You may get parents of the bully saying, well, actually, my child's not a bully, which is, we come back to what you said earlier, Emma, on make a note of the incidences, make a note what happened, date, time, even if it's one sentence to outline what happened that you know that for you was hurtful and harmful as a child, or what your child told you as a parent. These sorts of things will always come into play. But I know that on the .gov.uk website, there's a tab there under the bullying information that comes under bullying, saying complain about a school. Now, what the government will do with that information once you post it, I don't know, but there is a tab there that does say that. And maybe some people may look into it or not. Emma, that's all we've got time for. So there we are. Goodness, it does fly, I have to say. Thank you ever so much for your time today on this subject, Emma.
It's my pleasure. I think, Hattie, you were going to say that there were certain places for help and advice.
Yes.
So just as a final,
yes,
those are the places that I think are particularly useful: Anti-Bullying Alliance, Bullying UK, Childline, the Diana Award, Internet Matters, Kidscape, the UK Safer Internet Centre, UK Council for Child Internet Safety, and the National Bullying Helpline. All of those resources are available, and as far as I'm aware, are also free of charge. So
yes, no, indeed. Well, you just took the words out of my mouth, Emma, because I was going to mention the National Bullying Helpline, and it's a free confidential number, 0300 323 0169. There's Bullying Helpline for families, so include, you know, child and parents, another free confidential number, 0808 800 2222. And then there was another website which was, you know, just looked lovely to me. I thought, wow, they don't only help a child that's been bullied, they help parents as well, called the support line on 01708 765 200. I mean, what we will do, I think, is put out an article on our news page just to outline these numbers and these areas, because I think that would probably really help people who think, well, actually, I didn't quite catch that number and I didn't quite catch that email address, in order to get access to help. So there we are. What we will say to our listeners is don't forget to click and subscribe to our podcast, and you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn and YouTube by searching Get Legally Speaking. Also visit our website at getlegallyspeaking.com. Thank you very much for listening.